Hello and welcome to MycoAnatomical. In this video today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the various types of fungi found throughout Oblivion in both the remastered and original version and comparing them to what I believe the real-life counterparts would be based upon various types of features exhibited in the game. Now, before getting to the video, something I want to make note of is that when it comes to comparing the remastered to original versions of Oblivion, there are some types of fungi in the games that look very different from each other. And so there's going to be times where I'm going to be specifically referring to either the remastered version or the original version for each type of specimen discussed. Or there are times where I'm going to basically favor one game to the other when it comes to the real-life deduction, what I believe it best is. So I just want to get that out of the way before getting into the video. First on the list is the stinkhorn. The stinkhorn can be found in a variety of locations throughout Cyrodiil, primarily in the Blackwoods region on the ground. Now, there are many different types of stinkhorns that exist in real life in the Phallales order mushrooms, but these ones here really come down between three similar-looking species: the stinky squid, or Pseudocolus schellenbergae, Column stinkhorn, Cathris comatus, and Cathris acreli, or devil's fingers. Now, this can all be said when looking at the sporocarp itself, or the fruiting body. When looking at the upper region, you have these tentacle-like arms that kind of either shoot outwards or taper to a point, and this is highly indicative of the aforementioned species discussed, and really led me to my conclusion. Now, more so going into detail, looking at the bottom here, which I think is really cool, is that this sort of egg-looking thing here is called a vulva, and really what that is a type of protective peridium that protects the actual fruiting structure of this mushroom when it's in adolescent stages, and I thought that was a really cool reference they actually put in the game. Now, when it comes to what I really think is the deduction, it kind of depends upon whether we're talking about the original version or the remastered version of the game. With the original version looking a lot more like Stinky Squid, when looking at the sporocarp itself, the arms actually come to a tapered point, and there's 4 of them, which is indicative of what Stinky Squid is in real life, whereas with the remastered version, it has more than 4 arms, and they kind of spread outwards a bit, which leads me more to devil's fingers. Now, the only thing I'm going to say is that with devil's fingers, it doesn't really have any type of stipe or stalk, as was shown in the game, and really, when it comes to Stinky Squid, although it can have sort of a pseudo-stalk or pseudo-stipe, it's not as robust as what is shown in the game. So, there are some discrepancies, but nevertheless, I'm going to favor Stinky Squid just because I kind of assume, and as I discussed in the sort of basis of this video, that the OG version of Oblivion is really what they intended upon. And again, there are some discrepancies I'll talk about later, but I'm still going to go with Stinky Squid as the deduction for this mushroom. Hey, so it's future me here, doing the editing and everything like that, and I wanted to actually kind of do a little bit of a, I guess you could say, clause, or whatever you want to say, for the remastered version of the stinkhorn, and I found a better depiction in my opinion, which is going to be Asau rubra, and the reasoning for this is because when looking at the actual arms, the sporocarp, the arms are forked, and that's what is really depicted in the remastered version, and they're also spread out instead of going to a tapered point. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to include that here, that this really is, in my opinion, the actual ascertainment for the remastered version. I'm still just going to include or leave in the last stuff that I had, but yeah, so I just wanted to add that in. Now, the term stinkhorn comes from the nature of how these mushrooms will disperse their spores, and it's very unique. Now, the term stink, you would assume that the actual stench of the spore mass or gleba is a very foul-smelling stench, almost like a rotting corpse or something like that. And because of this, it will attract a lot of insects, primarily flies. And these flies they'll come over to the actual mushroom, they'll roll around in the gleba, and they'll disperse the spores of this mushroom through either what falls off the insects when they travel elsewhere or through their digestive tracts. Now, something else to note is that the peridium, kind of what I touched on before, with these eggs, it's very unique as well to the fact that they are preformed, which is very unique when it comes to eggs of mushrooms or peridiums of mushrooms, right? Is that most of the time they're not, the actual fruiting structures are not preformed as they are with stinkhorns, and because of this, if you actually harvest these eggs and they're in conditions that are ripe, they can actually hatch and they will produce their gleba. It'll be very, well, not great if you have them on you. So it's very unique for this order of mushrooms. Next is greenstain. Greenstain is a mushroom that can be found within the Blackwood, Great Forest, and Nemanay Valley regions of Cyrodiil. Now, for the real-life counterpart of this mushroom, it is going to be greenstain, or Chlorociboria rugonescens. Now, the naming of this mushroom in the game, like a lot of mushrooms, really gives it away. But on top of that, when looking at the sporocarp itself, it's the sort of cup-shaped sporocarp that has a blue-green coloration. Although in real life, these mushrooms are a lot smaller than what's depicted in the game. Now, something unique about this mushroom and why it gets its name is due to how it actually stains the wood that it inhabits through the xylidane that is contained within the mycelium of this mushroom. In fact, this type of stained wood has been used in carpentry in the past and is referred to as Tunbridge ware. So it's kind of a cool thing of how, the naming of this mushroom refers to, what its properties are when it inhabits certain types of substrate. Clouded funnel cap. Clouded funnel cap is a mushroom found within the Blackwood region or higher elevation lands of Cyrodiil, although it can be found in a variety of locations as well. For the real-life counterpart of this mushroom, it's going to be cloudy clitocybe or clitocybe nebularius. Now, when it comes to deduction of this mushroom, the coloration, grayish-brown, first kind of led me down this track of, looking at mushrooms that have a similar coloration, but more so with the actual naming of funnel cap, really made me specifically think of this genus clitocybe. Now, there are a variety of mushrooms that can hold a funnel-like shape. It's not something that's too unique to mushrooms. They can have a depressed center, but something sort of unique to clitocybe, and I'll kind of get back to it with the naming convention, is that there are a variety of mushrooms that have colloquial terms that refer to a funnel-shaped cap. An example of this is the funnel clitocybe or clitocybe gibba. Now, more so, and getting back to the actual naming convention, the Greek term clitocybe comes from clito, meaning slope, and cybe, meaning head, and this kind of refers to the funnel-like configuration that is often assumed by specimens within this genus. And that's really what led me down the track of, going into this genus, and then obviously cloudy, which is referring to the clouded. They both have colloquial terms that are very similar, the coloration's very similar, and kind of more minor things that I kind of looked at was the wavy margin. Again, there's a variety of mushrooms that can have wavy margins. It's not something too unique, but, with this actual species, it does often assume a wavy margin, and more so it has decurrent gills, which what that means are essentially gills that kind of run down the actual stipe or stalk of a mushroom in a kind of curvature type way. Again, decurrent gills, there's a variety of mushrooms that have it. It's not just, something unique only to the cloudy clitocybe, but putting everything kind of together, the pieces, it really kind of made me confident in this deduction being cloudy clitocybe. Bog beacon. Bog beacon is a mushroom common in the Blackwood region of Cyrodiil on the ground, and what's really cool about the naming of this mushroom in game is when you pick it up, it's called bog beacon asocarp, and the term aso is referring to the fact that this mushroom is an Aciomycete, or a mushroom that produces AC for its spore-producing cells on the actual sporocarp or fruiting structure. And along with bog beacon itself for the name, it really gave it away as swamp beacon, Mitrilla paludiosa, and this actual fungus is also in the Aciomycota phylum. So with this all combined and looking at the sporocarp, it doesn't have gills, has a sort of bulbous shape and yellow coloration, it really made this delineation pretty easy. I just thought it was really cool that they actually had the term asocap. Now, again, technically I think they're more or less referring to asocarp, if I'm really being technical here, because it doesn't really have a pileate configuration that you consider a cap. The structure is, not like that. But I'm not gonna, go all technical or anything like that. I understand that they're game developers. They're not, they don't study this. But I thought it was really cool that they included that. That's something that I thought was really neat. Next up is summer bolete. Summer bolete is a mushroom found in the Great Forest, Silverfish River, Panther River, and Lake Canyonless regions of Cyrodiil. Now, there are a number of boletes, which, if you don't know, boletes are kind of unique in the fact that they have a pileate configuration or a caps type configuration, but instead of gills, they have these pores that kind of look spongy. There's a lot of these ones that have a wide bulbous stipe and cap or stalk, and so at first glance looking at these, it really can be confused with a variety because not really anything in game gives a dead giveaway except for the fact of the naming, the colloquial term of summer bolete, which is an actual bolete or Boletus reticulatus or Boletus reticulatus, depending upon how you want to pronounce it. And like a lot of these fungi in Skyrim, in Oblivion, it kind of came up intuitively when, looking at the colloquial term in game and comparing it to real life. So the only thing I'll say is that typically these summer boletes are not as pallid in coloration or pale in coloration when looking at especially the remastered edition, but nonetheless, it's kind of a dead giveaway. So that is the summer bolete. The Karen bolete is a mushroom found in a variety of locations in the ground throughout Cyrodiil, from forests to urban locations to caves. Now, in real life, there are a few white-colored boletes that do exist, and to be honest, I had a bit of trouble deciding which one to fit the best. But that was until I saw this small detail of the stalks of these mushrooms in the remastered edition. If you look at them closely, they have these sort of dark lines or scabs that scatter on the stalks, and immediately I thought of one specific genus of boletes, the Lacinum genus. And this is a very unique genus for the fact that species will have these kind of scabs, and oftentimes the colloquial terms for a variety of mushrooms would be like scabber stalk or scab stalk. Now, Looking at the white cap, it more specifically made of two that are in this genus, Lachinum albellum and Lachinum holopus, or the lesser ghost bolete and ghost bolete, hence the colloquial terms. So between the two, I would go with the ghost bolete just because they oftentimes have bigger stipes. In the game, these are fairly sizable mushrooms, although like I've said, a lot of these fungi in the game were quite bigger than what you'd see in real life, but nevertheless, the wider stalks kind of made me lean more towards ghost bolete. So that is what my deduction is going to be for this one, the Karen bolete or ghost bolete. Fly Amanita. Fly Amanita is a mushroom common in the Great Forest and cities of Cyrodiil, although it can be found in a variety of other locations as well on the ground. To be honest, the identification of this one is really simple because Fly Amanita is Fly Amanita or Amanita muscaria. It is a mushroom I'm sure that most of you have seen in a variety of games or media, but one thing I will point out that I was kind of impressed by is when looking at the actual stalk or stipe of this mushroom, there's an annulus or a ring, and basically what this is it's a veal remnant that comes about once the veal or protective layer of adolescent forms of this mushroom break apart. It's also how you actually get the patching or the dots that you see on the pileus or the actual cap of the mushroom. Beyond this, I'm going to kind of talk a little bit more about the lore of this mushroom. Now, this mushroom has kind of garnered its reputation in correlation to mysticism from rituals that would occur in a variety of locations. One to note is Siberia. Basically, during the winter solstice, you would have mystics that would consume this mushroom and produce urine to give to other members of their clan, so they can too get high without feeling the other adverse symptoms that comes from the chemical compounds in this mushroom, specifically looking at mucimol. Now, it is believed that various religions have maybe started from these rituals. There's kind of more outlandish, reading about that, how Christianity and all these things had its basis actually in these rituals, but not really the most founded thing, but I thought still just kind of pointed out as a novelty. And one thing that's kind of a little bit more well known is that its correlation to Christmas. If you look at Christmas colors like Santa Claus, it has that sort of red-white coloration, as well as the fact that in rituals they would hang these mushrooms on trees, kind of like how you hang ornaments on trees, things like that. And one thing that is also kind of cool about this mushroom is that the common term of fly agar, which is another term, connected to Fly Amanita, is derived from the old practice of using these mushrooms in milk to attract and get rid of flies in the house by, basically stupefying them once they consume this. It was kind of an old way of getting rid of flies in your house, so just another thing to kind of point out. Elf cup is a mushroom growing mainly in the West Weald region of Cyrodiil, but can be found in other locations as well in the ground. Like a lot of fungi in this game, the name that it has really gives it away to what it is for its real-life counterpart, being the scarlet elf cup, or Sarcosypha coccinea, or Sarcosypha coccinea, depending upon how you want to pronounce it, for the actual real-life deduction. Aside from this, the general look of the sporocarp having its red cup-like configuration, like I said though, they are a lot smaller than what is depicted in the game, really gives it away. Now, something interesting to note is when it comes to the common name that it does have, it refers to kind of folk tales talking about how elves used to use these types of fungi to actually drink out of, hence the name elf cup or scarlet elf cup. So I just thought it'd be something interesting to note as well. But that is the elf cup or, elf cup. Next is Emetic rosula. Emetic rosula is a mushroom found mostly in the West Weald region on the ground, and when it comes to the real life counterpart for this one, it is Emetic rosula or Rosula emetica. And really, the naming gives it a dead giveaway. I mean, other things are, looking at the actual mushroom itself, it does have that red coloration without really any patching, although it can have white bloomage as the games try to depict. Although I will say I think the OG version does it better, representation of bloomage or breakages in the cuticle or top layer of the pileus. This is something that does happen to a lot of specimens, but other than that, there's not really much to say, to be honest with you. So that is the Emetic rosula. Next is the steel blue antheloma. The steel blue antheloma is a mushroom common throughout the Great Forest and cities of Cyrodiil, growing on the ground. Now, anthelomas are a real genus of mushrooms, and there's not too many that have a blue coloration for the cap, more specifically a kind of dark blue coloration. But when I thought the term steel blue, it really reminded me of midnight blue or the midnight blue antheloma or Antheloma matidium or medianox for the new term. And really this kind of again led me down to this deduction. There's not too many anthelomas that have a dark blue coloration, and just kind of this correlation to steel blue to midnight blue, it really made me think of this species of antheloma. So that is my deduction for the steel blue antheloma. Tender polypore. Tender polypore is a polypoid mushroom common in the mountainous regions of Cyrodiil, growing on trees. And the term polypore refers to specific types of mushrooms that instead of having gills on their underside, they will have a pored structure on the underside. Now, the real-life counterpart of this mushroom is tender polypore, or Fungus fomentarius. Now, looking at the actual in-game model, it does match pretty well to what is seen, with the hoof-shaped sporocarp and these concentric white sort of lines that you can see on these actual mushrooms. But obviously the tender polypore name really gives it away as well. Now, as the name suggests, this mushroom actually has tender-like properties to it, which is why it has the name tender polypore. It's been historically used by ancient humans for such. One famous example is Otzi, the Iceman. When he was discovered, he had the species of mushroom on him, and the powder of the sporocarp is highly flammable, and a lit ember could actually be held in this mushroom as well for long periods of time. And it's theorized that ancient humans used these fungi as sort of a transportation system for lit embers so that they can start fires a lot easier. In fact, the Latin name fulmes comes from the Latin term meaning flammable. So that is the tender polypore. Next is dryad saddle polypore. Dryad saddle polypore is a mushroom that can be found in select locations throughout Cyrodiil, growing on the ground. And for the real-life counterparts mushroom, it's going to be, well, dryad saddle, or Cyrrhoporus squamosus. Now, I could sit here and gripe out technically these mushrooms are saprotrophic on direct substrate, growing on wood instead of actually growing on the ground, but I'm not really going to do that. I don't know if I touched upon it in the beginning of this video, but I'm not really going to go too much, griping about, well, technically, ecologically, it should be doing this, this, and that. I mean, it is a video game after all, so I do understand. Now, something interesting that I did find that's outside of really, mycology related, I guess, is that in the original Oblivion, they actually spell dryad saddle wrong when you hover over it. They spell it as S-A-D-D-E-L instead of S-A-D-D-L-E. But look, I'm going to be honest with you here. I'm kind of going off script with this one and probably going to go to a tangent. I understand completely. When I do my logs, my website, the amount of times that I misspell things and I don't even understand how I could have done that, or even just mispronunciate things when doing these audio takes 1,000,001 times when I could just easily use AI like everyone else is doing to sound robotic. But honestly, I prefer to do it this way because I feel like it's a more authentic, and I just like to be real, that I'm not a robot, that I'm a person, and that's just a reflection of science as well. I know nobody cares about this, but I'm very passionate about this idea that people think science is a very sophisticated, clean thing when you're actually conducting, the scientific method or whatnot. When in reality, it's not that way at all. 9 out of 10 times from my experience, it is the most chaotic thing, and it's very rough, and you make 1,000,001 mistakes. And so again, it's the reason why I don't even like scripts, even though I am trying my best to read off a script. I like just talking off riff, just because I think it's more authentic. But yeah, so in a synopsis, I do understand I'm not griping on them for misspelling something, because the amount of times that I either mispronunciate, I say something wrong or I misspell something, I get it. So that is, again, dryad saddle. Next is whiffstalk. Whiffstalk is a mushroom that is found through the caves of Cyrodiil mostly, and they are found growing on the ground. For the real-life deduction, this one I'm going to refer to as the genus Cytherella, more specifically smaller statured Cytherellas. And the reason for this honestly comes down to the overall look of the Pileus. Now, granted, the really overall look in the game, there's not a lot to go off of, but when you look at more or less the remastered version and how this sort of coloration has this sort of tannage towards the center of the actual cap, it does remind me a lot of smaller specimens of Cytherella or species of Cytherella. So that's what I'm really going to go with for this one. Other than that, there's not a whole lot to go off of, because there are a lot of mushrooms that do have a very small statured stipe, especially when you're comparing the ratio between the actual cap to stipe. And so really just having that, there's not a lot to go off of. But once again, looking at sort of the design of the caps for the remastered version, it did remind me of these various species of Cytherella that are smaller. So that is going to be the whiffstalk. First up, for the Shivering Isles DLC, we have the fungus stalk. The fungus stalk is a mushroom found throughout, on the ground in numerous locations. Now, to be honest, this one was probably the hardest to actually ascertain confidently, and the reasoning is because of how different these guys are from the original version to the remastered version. For the original version, I felt pretty confident in this one being a flat-topped coral, a Claveliera delphus truncates. And the reasoning for this is because of the kind of obviously truncate looking top, hence in the Latin name truncates. that really made me confident in looking at this one, although that the coloration and obviously the length of these guys are not the same necessarily. Still, looking at that was pretty distinctive, and not to mention as well on the underside, there really aren't any actual gills. Now, these fungi in real life can have ridges, but they don't have gills. Now, that is until I looked at the remastered version, and then I kind of became a lot more confused because it looks, to me, really different. It doesn't, first of all, have that sort of truncate look that the OG version does have. More so, it seems to have, I don't know if those are gills or ridges. And like I said, the flat top coral can have ridges, so it kind of correlates. But again, to be honest, the remastered version reminds me more of something of a chanterelle, albeit a very, very long chanterelle. So I have to go with this for the actual deduction. There's just not too many things that seem too similar. And again, I'm kind of going to go stick with the OG version that they kind of intended upon this. That this kind of like, flat-topped sporocarp without any gills. So if we're talking about that, then yeah, I'm going to go with the flat-top coral. And to also address this, so with this DLC, there are a lot of fungi that have bioluminescent properties. And I'm just going to kind of ignore that because obviously there are fungi in real life that do have bioluminescent properties, but I really don't think the ones that are meant to be correlate to that. I just think they kind of, threw that in because, it's supposed to be a weird, wacky world, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I am going to address that. There is one that kind of ish could fit with it, actually, now that I think about it. I'll have to add that in more notes, so that's awesome. But, yeah, I just want to point that out and kind of address that because I know that this mushroom does have bioluminescent properties, but I'm not, for the most part, going to consider that in actual deduction. I'm more focusing on other things, so yeah, I just wanted to point that out. Next up is the worm's head cap. The worm's head cap is a mushroom that is found all throughout the Shivering Isles on the ground. Now, for the real-life counterpart, I looked at 3 aspects of this mushroom to help me in my deduction. 1 is the purple pileus coloration or cap coloration. 2 is the textured cuticle or top layer of the cap. And 3 is the fact that it's a gilled mushroom and not a polypore. Now, when taking this all in consideration, there are very few mushrooms that have a purple pileus coloration and a textured pileus at that and are gilled. And the really only one is the violet quart or Cortnaris violaceus that would be the best counterpart in my own opinion. And like I said, I mainly say this because the violet quart is distinct in having a textured cap that is distinctly purple. Now, there are some discrepancies, like for example, the actual violet quartz have not only purple on their cap, but purple on their gills and stipe at maturity. But really, this is a video game, so I would assume that, not many people are going to actually put in the time to make that coloration change, if that is what this is actually based on, for that matter. But yeah, that is the worm's head cap. Blister pod. Blister pod is a mushroom found throughout the Shivering Isles in numerous locations in the ground. Now, when it comes to identification of this mushroom, there are 2 ideas that I have, and the one I'll kind of get to later. But for just looking at the mushroom itself, when you look at this sort of wrinkled or blistered pileus and the fact that it has gills, it really reminds me of the wrinkled cap Cytherella or Cytherella delineata or Rugocephala. Now, there are other mushrooms, although not too many, that do have a wrinkled cap configuration and gills. One I can think of is the wrinkled cap quart. However, I'm really just going to stick to the Cytherella just because there's not really much in-game that would really lead one to the other. In real life, there'd be other considerations that are just not going to be depicted in-game to decide one or the other. Now, for the second part of this idea of what this mushroom may be, when you look at the actual configuration of the cap, it has a more conical configuration, not to mention the fact that the coloration is more of a lighter color, like a tan coloration, which is not really seen too much in the Cytherellas or the quartz, although they can have a sort of dark tan coloration. But to me, really looking at the conical configuration and correlating this to the mushroom trees, specifically these mushroom trees here, it really made me think of one specific mushroom, Coprinus comatus or shaggy incap, because not only do they have a distinctly conical configuration for their cap when they're in more adolescent stages, but also looking at the black tar that you get from these mushrooms, the saplings and the trees themselves, it really, to me, is just stupidly distinctive of a Coprinus comatus, because they go through a process called deliquescence, which essentially what that means is the gills of this mushroom, when they're in younger stages, are very close together and compact. And so basically this mushroom will produce an enzyme at the marginal point and going inwards, where the mushroom will sort of dissolve. And what this does is it opens the gills up. And why this is important is because it's advantageous for spore dispersal, because essentially if you have really close gills, oftentimes the basidia that's going to produce spores are going to just attach to the other gills, and that's not very advantageous. And so looking at this black tar, especially looking at these mushroom trees here, it looks 1-to-1 with Coprinus comatus. Not to mention the fact that these trees or mushrooms, and I'll kind of touch upon what these mushroom trees are actually, but they have a sort of cuticle configuration that reminds me so much of shaggy inkcap. It's where it gets its name of shaggy inkcap. And again, the coloration to me matches really well. The black tar, deliquescence, the black spore ink that's produced, all of this really just resembles Coprinus comatus to me. And so that could be the fact that the blister pods are sort of this adolescent stage before they develop themselves into a symbiotic relationship with adventitious roots, which that'll touch on a little bit. But yeah, so that's kind of the second parter for the blister pod, and also adding on top of that these type of mushroom trees. So yeah, that is the blister pod / mushroom trees. Now, talking about the mushroom trees themselves and what they really are, I really think this is a symbiotic relationship between these types of mushrooms and adventitious roots, or roots that go above ground, although they could be, shoot systems as well. But just looking at the way they kind of act, especially in watered areas, they really look a lot like adventitious roots to me. Not to mention that they kind of resemble the water root pods, and that kind of leads into, I kind of theorize that basically the water root pods, or something similar to it, develops a symbiotic relationship between adolescent mushrooms, and basically what it'll do is it will kind of ensnare itself around the actual stipe or stalk, and it'll kind of protect it because it has such a strong periderm, or that kind of woody structure on the actual dermis of the plant itself, that helps it protect it from certain environmental conditions. And it'll kind of not only go up the stalk, but it'll kind of go partly up the way of the actual marginal cap itself as well. So that's kind of touching upon what I think these mushroom trees are. It's not just a mushroom or a tree, but it's actually a relationship between two different organisms working together. And lastly, when discussing the mushroom trees, the yellow ones here, now this one has a little bit more trouble in my opinion, because, when it comes to the black tar, the other ones, that to me really gave it away to me. But these ones don't produce black tar. But nonetheless, this yellow coloration, and again, it kind of has this cuticle that kind of is raised, and there's two ideas that I have. The one is Pholiota. It's either some type of mushroom, the Pholiota genus, just because I say this because mushrooms in that genus have a yellowish orange coloration, and their cap cuticle will become raised as kind of what's seen in the game. Now, there's another idea that I had when I actually was recording this, is that it may be a jack-o'-lantern mushroom, or one of the mushrooms in the jack-o'-lantern genus, Omphaliotis. Now, the reason I say this is because they do have bioluminescence. Now, like I said, a lot of mushrooms in this game have bioluminescence for the DLC, but this one specifically, I could see a correlation between that, and kind of in the older versions of Oblivion, it really seemed like they had a more green coloration, emphasizing their, I don't know, a little more bioluminescent, we'll say. And jack-o'-lantern mushrooms are known to be bioluminescent. It's probably one of the, most popular ones, hence the name jack-o'-lantern mushroom. So that's kind of my sort of, ascertainment of which one the yellow ones would be. So yeah, those are the other mushroom trees. Next is Hydomazor. Hydomazor is a mushroom found in a variety of locations in the Shivering Isles DLC, and for this one, I really delineate it down to a genus, the Trichapnum genus of mushrooms. Now, the reason I say this is because there's not a lot of polypores that have a purple coloration, especially when you're talking about the upper side of the sporocarp itself. Now, with the genus that I discussed here, this one actually has not a upper sporocarp that's purple, but it's actually the underside of the pores that are purple. Nonetheless, I kind of thought of, maybe just an inverse of the coloration, and there are some that do have a kind of purplish, top, but most of the time they don't really have that. Now, there are other polypores out there that I can think of that have a pink coloration, like the rosy polypore, but like I said, when it comes to this violet-purple coloration, not many really come to mind. So I kind of delineate it down to this genus of mushrooms. So that is a Hydomazor. For the first honorable mention, I'm going to be talking about the various brown polypores that you can see littering logs throughout Cyrodiil. You can find them basically anywhere on down logs. And for the deduction, there are a variety of different types of brown polypores that exist, especially ones that have concentric zoning that you can see on these guys here, which basically what that means is like it kind of has these lines that are on the upper sporocarp. Now, because of this, there's, like I said, there's 100 probably different types of polypores that I can say that could possibly be the representation for what's in game. But I'm just going to kind of say one that comes to mind, and I'll kind of touch upon it a little bit as to why, but like I said, it's not really like a, I guess, deduction as much as it's just an honorable mention, but it's going to be Artist Conch, Organoderma aplantium. Now, the reason I say this is because looking at the margins, they do have a white margin, which is, again, not something too unique to Artist Conch, but it's one that I think of, and just looking at the concentric zoning and more or less brown coloration as well. So, you know, that's really just the honorable mention for these guys here. It's future me. I'm just going to get straight to the point because I've been doing these takes way too long. So these polypores here, they look a lot like red-belted polypores. I know what I kind of talked about before, so I'm adding this clause in. Looking back at them, like I said, they look a lot like red-belted polypores or Fomitopsis muensiae. And the reasoning for this is just because when you look at the actual top of the sporocarp, it has this sort of reddish belt that's on the sort of outer side or towards the margin. And even though this is not distinctly red necessarily, which, you know, there are red-belted polypores that do have a sort of coloration that's not red, to me it looks a lot like them. And so I wanted to kind of add that in. So that is going to be for this one, for these polypores specifically. Now, for the other polypores, here's the thing, right? And I'm going to relate this to real life. There are times, and all I have for what the game is telling me, and this is only for the original version, because the remaster, they're all the same, which I talked about before. So Artist Conch, I'm still going with the remastered, but for the original, where there's kind of more variation, all I have is the sort of top of the sporocarp, because they, like I said, they don't have underside that depicts gills or pores. And I'm gonna be honest with you sports fans, okay? There are times where I'll relate this to real life. If you can't tell, I've been doing this this video has been taking me a long time. I really underestimated it. And these takes, oh boy. Man, how sometimes I wish it'd be easy just to use AI. It'd be super easy. All I have to do is just type a script, and that's it. But nope, I persist upon doing this myself and messing it up a million times. Even though I have a script. Doesn't matter. Anyways, right? Like in real life, when it comes to identifying various types of mushrooms or other types of fungi that have similar sort of statured sporocarps, you know, there are times when, like, an example, like, I'll have somebody send me a picture, and it's like the top of a mushroom, and they're like, what is this? And I have to explain to them. Now, there are times where, yes, I can do that, but, like, for me, like, 80% of the time, when it comes down to identifying species, and oftentimes even your genus, right, there is a lot more that goes into depth than just, you know, the look of the pileus and top of the pileus. You know, oftentimes when people send me this, well, I have to say, okay, well, what's the underside? Is it gilled, not gilled? What environment is it growing in? Deciduous, not deciduous? If it is deciduous, what is it growing on? Is it growing on aspen? Is it growing on oaks? Maples? If it's, you know, a conifer, what type of conifer? Are we talking hemlock? Are we talking spruce? So on and so forth, right? And, you know, there's a lot of things, which makes it fun. But I'm saying all this, this huge tangent right now, you know, while you're probably eating a bowl of cereal or something like that, wondering why I'm talking a lot. I'm relating this because, you know, sometimes when I only have just the look or the top of a pileus, sporocarp, whatever, there, like, for these ones here, there are like dozens I can think of. There are dozens that I can be like, oh, well, okay, this coloration's very similar, the concentric zoning's similar, you know, it's saprotrophic properties similar, you know, there's a million and one, not a million, but you get my point, you get my drift, okay? So for these ones, instead of me sitting here and like throwing you 100, you know, ideas, I'm just gonna say, like, there's not enough information. I get it, heretical, I understand, dislikes are coming, sorry. My apologies, all right? But yeah, that's what I'm gonna say for these ones. So these are the polypores for the original version. I've been up way too late. All right, just I'm just keeping it real, keeping it 100 here. I've been up way too late. Okay, that's it. Sorry. For the second honorable mention, I'm going to be talking about the blue-green mushrooms that you see throughout the Palace Gardens or other locations in the Shivering Isles. Now, when I first looked at these guys in the Remastered Edition, I was having a hard time. And when I looked in the OG version, though, I saw these guys had patching on their actual pileus, which helped a lot delineate this down between two. One being the quilted green Rusula, or Rusula parvivariscens, or Rusula virescens, and the other one being the blue-green Stropharia, or Stropharia aeruginosa. And the reasoning for this, like I said, is because of this patching. It's very unique to certain mushrooms that have this similar coloration. If I had to say between the two, I would go a little bit more towards the green Rusula, or the quilted green Rusula, just because the patching looks a lot more reminiscent of that than it does on the Stropharia. But to be honest, I'm just kind of tossing these ones two up kind of equally, but leaning a little bit more towards the quilted green Rusula because of its unique aspect of having patching and its sort of greenish coloration that can sometimes have a tealish tone to it as well. So yeah, those are the green mushrooms for the second honorable mention. And that concludes the video. Now, to kind of have, I guess, sort of an outro here, I'm going to kind of just talk a little bit about, I guess, my opinion when comparing the remaster to the original versions of Oblivion. I'm not really going to talk too much about the actual fungi themselves, but the overall game, and just kind of my overall opinion, because it has actually changed by making this video. When the remastered version of Oblivion came out, I actually thought it was way better than the original version, but actually going back and playing the original version, I actually really enjoy the original version, I would say, more than the remastered version. Just when looking at the overall game and the design of the game, it really has to me a lot of character. And I know this might, I don't know if it's controversial, I'm not really in depth with any communities or whatever, but like comparing that back to the remastered version, I really found it like almost empty in a weird way. Like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of gameplay features that I really like and improvements that I think are needed for the game, but the overall sort of Unreal Engine look, that it just has this weird plastic look to me. Whereas even though the original Oblivion, you know, by all means, there are some traits that, you know, are in the game that are kind of goofy or whatever, especially when looking at the character designs, I still think it has a lot of heart, and there's this weird sense of like nostalgia that I get, and it really invokes this idea of fantasy world. I think Oblivion's very unique for the fact that it really, to me, in comparison to other Elder Scrolls games, is more of your classic fantasy, right? You know, you have all that type of, you know, those types of archetypes in the design of the game, and it really is very beautiful, honestly. Like, it really is this, even though it's rough, it has this sort of roughness that I really enjoy, and you just don't get that with the remastered version of the game. So I thought to kind of do that little 2 cents of what I think about comparing the remastered to the original game. So that concludes the video, and thank you for watching.